Hello, I'm back with another video, and I've brought John along again, the 6-inch pianist.
Don't sound too excited.
I'm sorry. I've got bored of you.
I've made a special effort.
The third or the fourth with it. It sounds like the fifth or the sixth I've done with you. No, it's always a pleasure, John. It's great. Thank you for joining me. Now, we talked about what to do, and I think I suggested this one, didn't I?
Yeah.
I suggested us regress back to our youth and do a bit about some UK indie. Indie? I mean, I don't know. Have you picked out any American, or is it all
No, all UK. Yeah, all UK indie. And as you say, it's very much regressing to my late teens and early 20s. So we're about the same age, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. So you were into it sort of at the time. It's like we're talking sort of late 89, sort of into the early 90s.
Well, for me, at that point, I was more into, I've mentioned this before, I was more into rock and metal.
Yeah. And
then it gets into the early 90s. And of course, Nirvana totally blew all that stuff out of the water.
Yeah.
You know, literally September 1991? Yeah. All that stuff just went. And over the next few years, I got into indie music and also Britpop. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think we're going to maybe talk about that, because I think most of mine, all of the things I've done is pre Britpop,
right?
And I think there's that interesting period of, I mean, what indie music is a very weird term, isn't it? Because it's such an all-encompassing term for all kinds of music, and probably only a couple of these, maybe even independent.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
But there is that weird period through the 80s into the early 90s that's kind of disappeared a little bit, because everyone remembers Britpop. That was massive, you know, Blur and Oasis, and that was the big thing. But prior to that, there were bands. Some of them managed to keep going, didn't they? Into the Britpop era, they managed to change and adapt and do that. But anyway, we might come to this when we go along. But do you want to go?
Well, no, you go first.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So as I live in Leeds, I think I'd do a Leeds.
Right. George Best, brilliant.
George Best, The Wedding Present. So this was released in, what was it, about 87. This is their first album.
Right.
And they, when I first got to know them, I grew up in a place called Malton, which is about 40 miles away from Leeds. So we would go through to Leeds to see bands, and The Wedding Present was a band that we would go and see. But when I was at school and I first kind of heard The Wedding Present, there seemed to be a real split between the people who liked the Smiths and the people who liked The Wedding Present.
Right. Okay.
And, well, it did seem to be at my school. That was the thing. You were either a Smiths fan or a Widows fan, and never actual meet. It was kind of, and I don't know if that's something to do with the Pennines. You know, the Smiths were across the other side of the Pennines, and of course, Wedding Present from Leeds. So this is their first album. It was on their own label, Reception Records. So this is a first pressing, I think.
Right. Very nice.
On that, and yeah, and what's the music? I mean, it's loud guitars. I mean, they were big fans of The Fall and the Buzzcocks, The Birthday Party. That was what sort of also Gang of Four, because they were from Leeds as well. I think they're sort of 10 years earlier, so they're Leeds band as well. So they were into that, and they chose The Wedding Present because it sounded a bit like The Birthday Party. It's like
okay, right.
Sort of a name that shouldn't be the name of the band. It also sounds a bit like a Harold Pinter play as well. Birthday Party. That is a Birthday Party. But and it's got some great stuff on it. It's got Everyone Thinks He Looks Daft. And probably one of my favourite songs of theirs is where is it? I need my glasses. My Favourite Dress, last track on the first side.
So did they have any sort of hits off that? Well, I say hits, but any sort of success off it?
No, I mean, it's got to 47, I think, in the chart.
Right.
Released, and you know they would get better. I think Sea Monsters, Bizarro came after this, then Sea Monsters, which was produced by Steve Albini, and that was
it? Okay.
Yeah, that one got to sort of like 14 or something. And then of course they famously did their
yes. So that's probably my first memory of the wedding present.
Yeah, that's 92. They did their
92. Yeah. So that they released a single every month, didn't they?
That's right. And they did have the record, didn't they? That's literally a record. That one release every month for 12 months.
Yeah.
Getting into the charts, and they were beaten by Elvis, but they were just reissues, of course.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because they did collect together those singles in the end, didn't they? On two albums.
Two albums. Yeah, and I've got those as well. They're great. And one day I've only got 2 of the actual 7 inches.
Oh right, okay.
And I do.
Yeah, you should try and collect them heavy.
No, don't stop it! Get behind me, Satan.
I feel like an enabler now, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, there is there's a similarity to the Smiths with certainly early Wedding Present. I think the difference is, I think Morrissey always, he wanted to be Baudelaire or he had ideas of poetry and stuff like that. And whereas Dave Gedge, I think, is a bit more grounded. It's a bit more.
It is. Yeah.
It's about fancying someone and them not fancying you, and the very basic kind of way that works. I got a great quote actually, because they were a big fan of John Peel. No, John Peel was a big fan of.
Yeah.
There's a quote. He says, "The boy Gedge has written some of the best love songs of the rock and roll era. You might dispute this, but I'm right and you're wrong."
Fair play.
No, who's going to argue with John Peel?
Yeah.
So, love the Weddos. Great.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, some of the early gigs I went to, the Duchess of York in Leeds, which is sadly no longer there. Wonderful nights with the Wedding Present. Right.
Well, you mentioned the Smiths, so I'm going to show the Smiths, and this is this is going to be like Red Rag to a Bull for you, isn't it?
It's all right. I'm going to stay out of it.
Right. Okay. So, so I didn't actually get into the Smiths until the early 90s. Obviously I knew some of the singles that had come out through the 80s, but certainly in the early 90s, I really got into them. And I always think of the Smiths as being almost like a perfectly formed band when they appeared. That first album. But most bands they might make a couple of albums building up to something. Or they might be looking to come out with a great debut album and they tail off. The Smiths, they made 4 truly great albums. Just from the off, they came out perfectly formed. Yeah. And it's the same with their singles and B-sides. And you got to talk about Morrissey because he's a peculiar character. Let's face it, and it is pretty problematic. Well, some of the things he's saying nowadays.
Problematic.
But with regards to the music, he was clearly a music fan. There's all these stories about him pre-Smiths writing into Enemy and stuff like that, voicing his opinions about various things. But when the Smiths got together and they started putting out records on Rough Trade, it's almost like he had already had a vision. He knew how the band wanted to be represented with the artwork. All these cover stars, all the literary references and the film references. It all, as I say once again, it all came fully formed. And I love that. I could have picked any one of their 4 albums. Mm-hmm. I think they're all fantastic. All of them have really strong opening tracks as well.
Yeah.
Great opening tracks. And yeah, brilliant. This is obviously Meat is Murder. So this is their second album. Is it from 85? Interestingly, the first time I heard this was on CD. And it was the American version, which included How Soon Is Now.
Oh, right.
Whereas the original UK version doesn't include that.
Oh, was it? It's just a single here, was it?
Yeah, just a single, yeah. And added on the American version later on. Right. But yeah, I know that people, don't always get him because of the vocal style as well. That obviously, if you don't listen to the lyrics, the whole Mr. Miserable thing, but, very witty lyrics. I know he's not on this record, but This Charming Man, it's still one of my favourite songs. What an opening line. Punctured bicycle on a hillside desolate. Where else are you going to get that? Brilliant, Nothing wrong with that.
Like I said, I think right from the word go, when I first would have been listening to them, I chose my sides with Dave Gedge and the Yorkshire.
Yeah, I understand that.
I think that's one of the reasons why. Also, I think I do respond a bit better to the kind of slightly more grittiness of Dave Gedge, a bit more down to earth. Like I said, he doesn't think he's coded.
Yeah, rather than the fayness, is that a word?
Maybe that's what it is. I think he's trying a little bit too hard for me, I think, maybe at the time.
But I mean, what I will say, I mean, I've got a couple of friends. I always go and see Morrissey even now when he tours, because I've got a couple of friends who are proper hardcore Morrissey and Smiths fans. I mean, my one friend, you must have seen him over 300 times now. It's proper.
Wow.
And I've never known such adulation for an artist, for a musician, as Morrissey attracts with his fans.
Doesn't he? Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's his intensity, which always comes across the music, which attracts people. I don't know, but
I wonder if it's because there's something quite, personal about his lyrics that people feel that he's, more than perhaps some other artists, that actually he's speaking to them.
Yeah.
And they can appreciate that position and those feelings, and so therefore to have someone articulate that, I think that's quite special. And so suddenly, I can understand completely how someone can do that. Yeah. Dave Gedge is the sort of person you'd just like to have a pint with down the pub, really.
Yeah, but you can't really see yourself having a pint with Morrissey, can you?
I think he drinks halves.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, there's some. Both of these, it's sort of noted for their lyrics. And I think actually most of the stuff I've got, there is a sort of, there's a wittiness and a sort of a barbed nature to all the lyrics in indie rock. Maybe partly because it was sort of going against more of the sort of mainstream that was a bit more, I don't know,
definitely
not bland, but just universal. And they're more about, I suppose, the individual and smaller groups. Right. Okay. The Wonder Stuff. This
Good
is
local lads. Yeah.
I was going to say, I was going to say Stourbridge, was it? Or somewhere?
That's right. Yeah.
So this is Eight-Legged Groove Machine. It's their first album, 88. And this one of these things. I think some of it is 86. I think, but I think it was released in 88. It's suddenly interesting when you think about, the Smiths, this, and the Wedding Present album. They're all in the 80s, and they don't sound like the 80s. None of them. I mean, this is you're only a couple of years away from some of the height of 80s kind of I don't know, pop music, and it's so very different. And this thing stands up quite well. I think it's got the great single "Unbearable," which I think is
brilliant,
cracking single. That they kind of, I mean, it's Miles Hunt was the lead singer, and most of these. It's interesting because I was thinking about some of the more modern indie bands, and they're more of a collective. You think things like Radiohead and I don't know, Coldplay and stuff like that. They're very much a whole. Whereas I think with a lot of the indie bands, there was a voice, wasn't there? Yeah. Like either Dave Gedge or Morrissey or Miles Hunt, and they wrote the lyrics, and it was in some ways their thing, and they got together a band around them, really. So what was I going to say? I'll tell you what I did, which might be interesting for James and Steve if they're watching this, is that Miles Hunt's uncle, Bill Hunt, was a keyboard player for ELO and Wizard. I
didn't know that, really.
There you go. So it's really nice. And of course their next album, I just grabbed that. Was a bit more of a sort. They start to go in a real folky direction after their first one, don't they? And the acoustic guitars come out, and by the time you get to, I was going through some of this stuff, and a lot of my indie stuff are all on tapes.
Oh right, okay.
I loved Elvis, which was their third album, and that's where it goes full on kind of folk rock almost, doesn't it?
But of course, they had, slightly after that, they had. Proper hit singles. Not just indie chart hit singles. They have proper hit singles, didn't they?
I was going to say. Eight-Legged Groove Machine. I did write this down. It got to 18 in the charts, which ain't. That's not bad. And I think their later albums, went further up. And of course, I was trying to find the single. I did have the single of "Size of a Cow," I couldn't put my hands on it. I don't know what happened to it. But
and that's a brilliant pop song. That and Welcome to the Cheap Seats and Don't Let Me Down Gently, just brilliant.
Well, Welcome to the Cheap Seats had Kirsty MacColl on backing vocals, didn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, no, I mean, in some ways, I think Eight-Legged Groove Machine, I think, stands up a little bit better than their later albums, because it doesn't have that folkiness to it. It's a bit more of its time, I suppose, a bit more punky. Louder guitars. I'm not sure there's any acoustic guitars on this. But yeah, and they were part of this Grebo movement, weren't they?
That's right.
And that's Graham's thing.
Yeah, Graham will be talking about it. But they had a number one single, didn't they?
Did they?
With Vic Reeves, they covered Dizzy, didn't they?
Dizzy. Yeah.
You got that to hand, have you?
Nah, probably haven't. This is boring stuff, isn't it, for people? Yeah. Anyway, never mind. Yeah, I do have it. I got the 12-inch there with a lovely poster of the Wonder Stuff and Vic Reeves.
Brilliant. Put it up. Right.
Okay, you go.
Right. Okay. Right. So the debut album from the Manic Street Preachers, Generation Terrorists. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot wrong. There's a lot wrong with this album. There's as much wrong with it as there is right with it. But they sort of appeared, didn't they? They stated they were going to make one album. It's going to be a double album. It was going to sell 16 million copies, and then they're going to call it a day. So two things didn't quite happen there. It didn't sell 16 million copies, and they're still making records now, aren't they? So yeah. But yeah, it's I say it's not perfect. It's too long. It certainly tails off towards the end. There's a couple of duff tracks on here, but there's enough attitude and enough good tunes to back up that attitude to make it a great record. I mean, songs on here, if you don't know the record, stuff like Motorcycle Emptiness, You Love Us, Little Baby Nothing with the duet with Tracy Lords. It's great. Interesting, when it was released in America, it's got a different track listing. So it's a shorter version, but they took off a lot of the more political tunes. They didn't think that the Americans would particularly like the politics of the record, which was strange. And also, some of it was re-recorded. So I've got the American version on CD, and it's a sort of harder mix. It's more rocky, So I think they re-recorded some of the parts as well. Sorry,
it's a different mix, is it?
It's a different mix, yeah. In America, some of the tracks, yeah. So this for me, I was saying before that you're talking about the late 80s, early 90s. I was very much listening to rock music at that point. And this was almost a bit of a bridge across to indie, because...
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were certainly darlings of the NME, but also, I wouldn't have been reading NME in 1991 and 1992. I'd been reading Kerrang! Or Raw magazine, those sort of rock magazines. But they were darlings of, that's right. There were darlings of Kerrang! As well,
Yeah.
And that's because the sound is very much, obviously, it's influenced by the likes of The Clash with all the slogans and stuff. But also Guns N' Roses, the music, the actual, the guitar licks and riffs and stuff, it's very much influenced by Guns N' Roses. So that sort of dragged me from that more rock sound across to a more indie sound.
Yeah, and I saw them. They must have been touring that, or maybe even before that. I saw them at the Philadelphia. It was when they all came on stage wearing balaclavas.
Oh yeah. It's interesting because I think the Manics. I mean, that you think of their first 4 albums. Again, there's quite very interesting records, very different. Each one's very different. If they had called it a day after Everything Must Go, how would they be viewed now?
Yeah.
But the fact that they've gone, it's almost done them a disservice with the fact that they've kept making records, making good records. But it takes away something from those early records, the fact that they're still out there doing it,
Well, I suppose with Richie Edwards' disappearance, I suppose, which was in the prior, just lead up to that. What was it? What did you just
Everything
say?
Must Go, yeah. So it was after the Holy Bible, yeah.
Yeah, I once had a copy of that actually on vinyl. I picked it up in an Oxfam shop. Literally only probably about 2 years after it came out. I bought a group of them. I've still got a Sleeper record actually, but I sold the rest online. I think there was a Sleeper, there was a Cast record, there was U2's Pop,
Right.
They're 50p in it. I don't know, maybe a dead indie fan.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But it's I mean, Everything Must Go. When you just mentioned that record there, a Design for Life is one of my favourite songs. And again, we're talking about Morrissey and Dave Gedge. It's the lyrics again, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what attracts that sort of adulation, that hardcore fan base. I mean, a Design for Life. What's the lyric? Libraries gave us power, then work came and made us free. I mean, that's a #2 pop record. That's quite a lyric, isn't it? Really,
it sounds a bit Marxist to me.
It does a little bit, doesn't it? But there you go, Mannix.
Cool. Okay, so my phone's going off. Someone's got it. Okay, my third one, another lead band, Cud. This is Asquarius. This is their third album, their first major label on A&M. So this was from '92. This is so this is prior to the whole Britpop stuff. What are we saying? When would you say is the start of Britpop? 94, 95?
Well, I would say the start of Britpop would actually be Modern Life is Rubbish by Blur, which was 93. But it really got, the wheels really started going in 94.
Yeah. So again, another Leeds-based band, and their earlier stuff was a bit rawer. Their music is kind of I want to say indie funk, but it's not like a kind of what was that, Freak Power? It's not that sort of. Remember them? It's not that. It's not an overtly funky thing. There's just a bounce to their drum and bass lines. It's got a real sort of a bounce. I think that's the best word I can come up with.
It's funny because I remember them, but I couldn't name any of their tunes.
I think I fell in love with them because I fell in love with a girl.
Right.
There was a girl I was at college with called Buff, and she always used to wear a Cud T-shirt, and I fell in love with her, and I probably bought the album on the strength of wanting to endure.
So it's all Buff's fault, is it? Yeah.
Definitely her fault. But yeah, great. I mean, it's pop. I mean, actually, most of my stuff, I would say, is indie pop. Yeah. I am a sucker for a good pop tune, and I think Cud, the hit, kind of hit, Rich and Strange was from this, which is a great tune, I think. Through the Roof again was formed in Leeds '87. So they're all of these bands started about late '80s. So they kind of start out as '80s bands, I suppose. It's really weird to think that. But yeah, in fact, their first singles were released on Reception Records, which was the Wedding Presents label that they started.
Okay.
And this is also another Leeds connection. It's produced by John Langford of the Mekons. Later of the Waco Brothers, and sort of gone all countrified in Chicago. And it's really interesting to hear. You don't hear the Mekons on it at all. It's far more poppy and boppy than that. But yeah, I do that. And again, with what was his name? I can't remember the guy's name. What was his? I can't remember his name. It's not got on the back of here. Anyway.
Right.
Good. Asquarius.
Very good. Right then. Okay. A load of old hype here. So. When I think of this record, that's exactly what I think about is hype, because this is Suede, their debut album. So this is 1993. And I mean, for a time they were massive, and they hadn't even made a record at that stage. They hadn't even put a record out.
Well, weren't they on? Because I bought Metal Mickey when they performed it on
Top of the
Pops. And it wasn't in the charts. Were they signed? I can't even remember if they were signed at the time.
Yeah, I mean, they've been signed. They've been signed.
But it wasn't in the charts.
I mean, the thing about Top of the Pops was that, obviously it'd been running for years, and it always worked on the same basis that the only records that were shown were records that were going up the charts.
Yeah, that's right.
So to have a band on there performing a single that hadn't actually come out yet was something totally alien to the format. Something brand new. But yeah, I mean, Suede were on, the cover of the NME and all these sort of magazines and music weeklies without having released a record. And, that's a lot of hype. The one thing I'll say is that the album backs it up. When it eventually came out, I mean, well, first of all, the three singles from the album, that came out prior to the album being released. Yeah, the Animal Nitrate, Metal Mickey, and The Drowners.
Drowners is a great single.
Yeah, 3 perfect singles.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if you're a band and those are your first 3 singles, you're doing something right on you. But the album's great. I played this last night when we spoke yesterday about doing this video. I pulled out a couple of records, and this is what I did play last night, and it still sounds brilliant. You know, it's really got that Bowie thing going on. It's clearly a real reaction to what was going on in America. Obviously, a lot of the American music coming over here with Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, that sort of stuff. This is a very English-sounding record. It's got that sort of Bowie swagger going on. It's a little bit glammy. Yeah, so it's a really good album. And actually, I think their first 3 albums are all excellent. This, Dogman Star, and then Coming Up, which is the album after Bernard Butler left the band and Richard Oakes came in on guitar.
I fell off the Suede train after Dogman Star, I have to say.
Right.
Then if it was Bernard Butler leaving, what was it, Oakes, the young lad?
Yeah, Richard Oakes.
Richard Oakes.
It was interesting because...
Great guitar player, but he was, you know... but he was initially trying to replicate Bernard Butler.
Well, he was. I mean, when he joined the band, he must have been 17 or 18 or something like that. And he'd previously just been a fan of the band. He'd written fan mail to Bernard Butler. So the basically brought in a guitarist who could play exactly like Bernard Butler because he just studied him and whatever. But obviously, when it came to making a new album and the Maid Coming Up, what I like about that record is it's got its own feel. It's not just a replica. It's not just a duplicate of what they've done before. Yeah, it's a really good pop album coming up.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit more hook laden, I think. And,
yeah, it is.
Yeah, and I think that worked for them at the time. Was it
Trash? Trash. That's a great song. The Beautiful One, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
But their debut. Because I was heavily I read the Melody Maker and the Enemy every week, and that was and I remember because they were, although their albums, certainly their first 2, are very, I would say, the antithesis of what the Britpop thing kind of became. He was the poster boy. I mean, was it Select magazine with the cover of him with the Union Jack flag?
Yeah.
And I remember all of that. But I remember the excitement of that album coming out because it was like, tracks were. I remember getting a tape with the Melody Maker that had 1 track from it, or
oh right, okay,
I remember that sort of drip feed, and I think I must have bought it the day it came out.
It's interesting because when you mentioned that, I mean that's a famous magazine cover. Brett Anderson, wrapped in the Union Jack. Now it was only a year or 2 before that Morrissey did the same thing with the Union Jack and was absolutely slated for it. And it's a real tightrope, isn't it? It's a real fine line between it's a same imagery, but it's just the way that it was taken. But I mean, that's almost, you could say that particular magazine cover was almost the start of Britpop.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Definitely.
That moment, just with that, not necessarily a record, but that magazine cover was what.
No, yeah. You're right. Yeah, it was very much so. Okay. Now, actually, this one ties in. I've swapped them around just so I can do this one.
Okay, yeah.
The Auteurs' New Wave, and this came out the same year as Suede's debut, and it was also nominated for the Mercury Music.
Right, of course it was, yeah.
Award, and it went to Suede, didn't it?
Yeah.
Now, this is the kind of brainchild of Luke Haynes, who is a irascible, angry, bitter, cutting kind of guy. His lyrics are, very sort of pointed, having a go at something all the time. You mentioned the American influence, and there's a track on here called American Guitars, which is basically having a go at all the British bands that suddenly decided to turn their sound into a sort of a grungy sound. But he sings. It's almost like where is Suede? Where is Brett Anderson? There was that kind of slightly kind of a bit Bowie, that sort of heroin chic.
Yeah,
kind of thing,
that's it. Yeah,
wasn't there? This is far more kind of rooted in an Englishness, and and sort of the Schadenfreude of middle class living. And have you read his book Bad Vibes?
Yes.
Ooh,
it's a great book.
It's great, and if you're interested at all in reading something about the whole Britpop era, is it the subtitle the man who killed Britpop or something? I can't remember.
It's something like that, isn't it?
Something like that. But yeah, he has a right go at everyone. He's not got a good word to say about anyone. But I saw them support in Leeds, and I think they were chucked off the gig. I think him and Matt Johnson fell out.
Right. You get the impression that he wouldn't necessarily be an easy guy to get on with. There's another one you wouldn't want to go for a beer with. You know?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. He'd hate me immediately, and he'd take the instant dislike. Just
looking at you, you'd hate me.
Yeah. I mean, what, cut to the middleman. Don't bother trying to get to know me. Just make the decision at the beginning. And he talks about in his book. He talks about, and actually, if anyone's interested, you can hear him. It's on YouTube. Him reading it.
Is it right?
Yeah, so it's nice to hear him going on about it. But yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, he talks about, with this album that was reviewed so well, and it was nominated for the Mercury Music, with Suede, and they're very much in the same kind of bag. He then kind of goes to completely shoot himself in the foot, really, with each and every project he did went more and more sort of away from the mainstream and towards a sort of I picked out, because he would then go off and do the Bader Meinhof album.
Yes,
Have you got that?
I haven't got that.
It's because he did this. This is 95, I think, and I was thinking maybe 96. Yeah, probably recorded in 95, and that who's gonna make it in the height of Britpop, an album about Bader Meinhof, a German terrorist, socialist terrorism, communist terrorist group, which is a kind of at once a critique of them, but equally a love letter to them.
Yes, yeah.
And a sort of an all-round concept album. And but it's weird because it's so different. It's got tablas all over it and weird sort of squelchy, funky keyboards. But yeah, and then of course there was a Black Box Recorder.
Yeah, so I have the Black Box Recorder album, and I think that's a lovely record.
Yeah, well, that was where he teamed up with Sarah Nix, who did a sort of a chanteuse kind of sort of really dry, and almost less singing, more sort of talking through a lot of it. What was it, Black Box?
A very nice record, yeah, really nice record.
But I think that is an absolute classic, really. I think.
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah, new wave, your tours.
Right. Well, I'm going, straight. I'm going mainstream, straight down the middle with this one.
Hey.
Part Life. So we mentioned Blur. Now, talking about Britpop, there's a lot of problems with Britpop. Looking back now, I loved it all the time. Excuse me. It was so exciting. It was so insular. I don't know how well any of these records travelled, or how did they do abroad? I don't know, but in the UK for a period of 2 or 3 years, everything was Britpop, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And there's some great records come out of that, and I think this is probably the best Britpop record. But there's a lot of really average music come out of that period as well.
Yes.
But what's problematic about it? Britpop wasn't just the music; it was fashion, it was lad mags and stuff like that, which, looking back now, doesn't seem right. But this album in particular, it's so well done. It's fun. It feels like it celebrates all of English pop music. Basically, you've got that Kinks influence going on, but also you've got that late 70s, early 80s new wave sound in there. Then you've got these little weird instrumentals on there with which almost sound a little bit Stereo Lab, but also a little bit, Fairground. Yeah. It finishes with a track called Lot 105, which is like a Cockney Knees Up. It's a lovely record, and the singles from it as well. You've got Girls and Boys. That is a perfect mid-90s single. That bass line from Alec James. I mean, Alex James, a really underrated bass player. I mean, just listen to that one song, the bass line on it. It just makes the song. It's brilliant. And then stuff like End of a Century was a single, To the End. Yeah, a really great album.
But some of the stuff on there is, you know, yes, you got Girls and Boys, which is a kind of a boppy, poppy sort of danceable tune. But some of the other ones are fun. There's elements of sort of Scott Walker and To
the End, yeah.
And what's his name? Ginsburg. Serge. There's a bit of that in there, isn't it? Because was it off that? What was the was there a single of To the End of the End of the Century?
End of a Century, yeah.
Wasn't there one that what's the name? Did vocals for the French? What's the name? Francois Hardy.
I don't know.
Maybe it was a B-side or something, but
right, okay.
So it had that sort of that French, Serge Gainsbourg type of thing going on. But so it's interesting that it wasn't just all that sort of lad.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, the songwriting is excellent. I mean, it's interesting as well because I'm sure that Damon Albarn, certainly in America, is much better known for being part of the Gorillaz than being in Blur, you know. But obviously in this country, this was such a big record at that time. Yeah. And it's interesting because I absolutely love this record and I played it a lot, you know, back in when it came out in 94, 95. But I didn't buy the follow-up. And I can't imagine that now, you know, being so into a record and not being interested in what they did next. It was because of the way the whole thing went.
Sorry.
The next album was Great Escape, wasn't it? And I just remember the single coming out, Country House, and it just lost me. It was just, you know, it just wasn't the same quality. I just didn't buy the album. But I still play this now. This is a top 10 album for me. This is
right.
Yeah, a real feel-good album.
Well, Blur were a band I didn't really get into at the time. That they were sort of, but I mean, I think we've talked about this before when we've spoken. Is that you had to make decisions back then which albums you got because you couldn't stream them like you can now. You know, you might listen to the radio and you know they'll hear a track here and a track there, but you had to decide this is the band I'm going to buy and collect. That one I'm not. I like them, but I just can't afford the pocket money to go onto that.
That's basically it, yeah. You know, you might, you know, if you had money for 2 albums a month or whatever it was, then or an album a month, then you've got to make your choice which one you're going to buy. So
yeah, I think in some alternate, you know, universe there is a completely different Headley with a completely different record collection based on what you didn't buy the last time.
I'd really like to meet that Headley, yeah.
It's all jazz. It's all jazz. Right, okay, my last one. Now, this is a silly one. This is Carter.
Oh, yeah.
Carter, The Unstoppable Sex Machine. This is their first debut album, 101 Damnations. And again, we were talking about the sort of the witty lyrics. I mean, they're a bit more obvious puns and they're not particularly advanced witticisms, but not with people like Luke Haynes and Morrissey. I don't think. But it's fun, isn't it? It is, yeah. And they came out of the Grebo kind of thing, which was this sort of mixture of dance and rock and hip hop even, and a bit of everything. And it was really basically 2 guys, wasn't it? Fruit Bat and Jim Bob.
Yeah.
And then a sequencer for bass and drums. I mean, the joke wasn't it that they were called Carter, the Unstoppable Drum Machine. It wasn't that funny either.
Oh, sorry, was I supposed to laugh? Sorry. No, do that again.
I'll put the sign up the next time.
Yeah, okay.
Was this Sheriff Fatman was the kind of the
But that's a great song. Sheriff Fatman is a great song.
What was it? But 29 in the charts for a debut album of sort of weird kind of indie. But yeah,
so what were the other singles on that?
I'm not sure what the other singles were on this. I don't know. Sorry.
No, because Sheriff Fatman was a big tune at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
So the album after that, was it 1992, the album? Yeah.
I think so. And because they sort of, I don't know, pretty prior, during Britpop, I remember there was the whole big thing where Fruit Bat rugby tackled Philip Schofield on live television at the Smash Hits Poll Winners Party, which was all part of the whole big thing. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah, there was something. Oh yeah, no, I got a couple of other singles by them, and of course they did After the Watershed, which was the one that used a bit of the Rolling Stones' Ruby Tuesday, which it doesn't say it on here, and I know that they got into a big bit of trouble, and I don't know actually what happened to it. I think maybe the case was just eventually fizzled out. But yeah, they were just fun. I think the interesting thing about these records is I think apart from maybe the auteurs, which is slightly more serious stuff, I think mine are a little bit more knockabout than the Manics and the Smiths.
Yeah. Excuse me, yeah. Right. Okay.
Hey.
So again, Britpop era. This is the Blue Tones with their debut album, Expecting to Fly. I'll take it out of the plastic. So I thought you were going to show. I thought if I'd have picked beforehand what I thought you were going to show, I thought you'd have included the Stone Roses debut album.
Oh, really?
And this certainly owes quite a lot to the Stone Roses.
Yeah.
Certainly with the music, I mean, not so much the vocals, but the guitar parts and the structure of the songs certainly have a Stone Roses feel in places. I think this is a great debut album. Their sort of career went on. I think they still play now, but they made some good records after this. But this is a really good debut album. It's a great debut album. And as I said before, I think for an album to be great, you've got to have a truly great opening track. There's no two ways about that. You've got to come out fighting, and this does that. The opening track's called Talking to Clary. It's a brilliant opening tune. But the singles from this album, Blue Tonic, Cut Some Rug, and in particular Slight Return.
I loved Slight Return.
Are so evocative of that period for me. It just reminds me of 1995, particularly Slight Return. I remember the video as well. It's got a black and white video of him running down the road. Was it black and white? I don't know. Maybe my memories are only in black and white. So Mark Morris, I saw Matt Berry play a few years ago, and he's the guitarist in Matt Berry's band.
Oh,
so
really?
He does a bit of moonlight in there.
Well, I know he's good because I know he does quite a bit with Dodgy these days.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing about a lot of these bands, like the Wonder Stuff, Carter, Cud, the ones that sort of fizzled out. After because the interesting thing, the Wonder Stuff, I think they called it quits in '94. Just as Britpop was. But like a lot of these bands, they've all kind of come back onto the sort of there's people of our generation, John, that desperately want to relive our youth and go back and see these gigs like we did when we were sort of 17, 18.
But it's true. I mean, I can't believe you haven't shown a Dodgy album, Headley. I really can't believe that. There, you see, I specifically didn't pick a Dodgy album because I figured.
I specifically didn't. I thought you might.
But no. So I mean, that Britpop period, and there are a few albums like this which really take me back to that point. I mean, I'd have been in 1994, 95. I'd have been 18, 19. Yeah. And it's that whole thing about I just started work. First time I had a little bit of money in my pocket. To go out, you got your beer money of a Friday night and buy a couple of records. And it all just seemed incredibly exciting. I mean, think about, what I'm saying there about Part Life. It's such an uplifting record. It made you want to be part of it. Whatever that was, you hear that record, you wanted to be part of that. That's the way it made me feel as a teenager. And, when we said we're going to do this video, I put it on the other day and straight away you're back in that frame of mind as well. It's such an uplifting record. Really good stuff.
Yeah, it's been since we talked about doing this. It's been a bit of I spent the last the last week in the 1990s. Really, it's been a bit weird because a lot of the bands that are connected to going to gigs with friends. Because it's interesting because I grew up in a house that really the only music that was there was folk music, classical and jazz. That was all really that was in our house, and popular music didn't get a look in.
Yeah.
And when I was at school, you talked about being into heavy metal or rock. My mates at school were heavily into Metallica and the Almighty and Halloween and some of that sort of stuff, all kinds of. And and I never really got that. But when the sort of indie stuff started coming through, or at least I started to get sort of exposed to it, I suddenly it was a bit of an epiphany for me, and I think it opened up my eyes to other music, because I think it had some of that sort of poppiness that I liked from things like the Beatles, Who, and I think that's what a lot of them are. Some of them are, there is that sense of it's looking backwards, isn't it? With some.
Yeah, it is.
Like you mentioned, with the Kinks, the Who.
Yeah,
they all sort of drew from that, didn't they? And I think that's one of the things. Maybe that's the thing about the sort of the Britpop era. It was very much one foot in the 60s, one in the 90s.
It did. I mean, the strange thing about it is that we're perhaps the same distance away from that now as Britpop was from the 60s at that point. It's a strange thing. So us looking back at the 90s. You can see how, how they were perhaps having listened to their parents' record collections of the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and the Kinks. Not that we're old or anything, but there you go.
No. Well, I look forward to your little boy in 20 years' time taking up all your Blur records and.
I can't see it somehow.
Right. Okay. Let's call it an end, shall we? Thanks, John.
Cheers.
Yeah, a real sort of evocative memory lane of fun and pain, as remember. Anyway, let's start that. So right, thanks, John.
Cheers.
See you sometime. Bye bye.
Bye bye.